Money talks, but true power silences. When a casually dressed black woman settled into seat 1A on a transatlantic flight out of Chicago, the flight crew thought they had an easy target. They saw a faded vintage hoodie, unbranded sneakers, and made a faithless assumption. They snickered, they whispered, and eventually they tried to have her dragged off the plane in handcuffs to appease a wealthy regular. But they did not know who they were messing with. They did not know that with one quiet phone call, she would not just ground their flight, she would shut down the entire airport, permanently revoking their clearance and ending their careers. This is what happens when unchecked arrogance meets absolute undeniable authority. The neon lights of Chicago, O'Hare International Airport, buzzed with the frantic, nervous energy of thousands of travelers rushing to their gates. Among the sea of tailored business suits, frantic families, and exhausted backpackers walked Harper Vaughn. She did not look like the CEO and majority shareholder of Vaughn Aviation Logistics, a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure firm that effectively managed the ground operations for half the commercial aircraft in North America. She looked like someone who just wanted to get some sleep. Harper wore a comfortable, oversized gray hoodie, a pair of worn-in denim jeans, and pristine white sneakers. She had endured a sprawling, exhausting week negotiating a corporate merger in the city, and the only thing standing between her and a glass of vintage Pinot Noir in her London townhouse was a long flight on Transglobal Airlines. As she approached the gate, the boarding process for first class and Diamond Elite members had just begun. Harper bypassed the winding economy line where hundreds of passengers were already shifting impatiently from foot to foot and stepped onto the plush blue carpet of the priority lane. Reed Slater, the lead gate agent, looked up from his computer terminal. Reed was a man who wore his meager authority like a badge of honor. He had a perfectly gelled comb-over, a sharply pressed uniform, and a habit of judging passengers based entirely on their luggage. When he saw Harper walking down the priority lane with a scuffed canvas duffel bag slung over her shoulder, his jaw tightened. Before Harper could even present her digital boarding pass, Reed held up a stiff, dismissive hand. "Excuse me, ma'am," Reed said, his voice dripping with loud, practiced condescension. He projected his voice so the nearby passengers could hear. "This line is strictly for first class and our Diamond Elite members. The boarding group for main cabin and basic economy hasn't been called yet. You need to step back and wait in Zone 4. Harper paused, lowering her phone slightly. She offered a polite, patient smile, the kind she usually reserved for junior executives who hadn't read the briefing notes. "I'm in the right place. I'm flying first class." Reed let out a short, breathy laugh that was completely devoid of humor. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering critically on her hoodie. "Right. First class. Ma'am, I deal with seat jumpers all day. We are fully booked in the premium cabin today. Please step aside so the actual priority passengers can board." Behind Harper, a tall, older white man in a bespoke charcoal suit cleared his throat loudly. This was Preston Ashford, a man whose patience was evidently as thin as his hair. "Is there a problem here, Agent? Some of us have schedules to keep." "No problem at all, Mr. Ashford," Reed beamed, his entire posture shifting into blatant subservience. "Just redirecting a lost passenger." Reed turned his glare back to Harper. "Last warning. Move aside." Harper did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply stepped forward and placed her phone face up on the scanner. The machine let out a cheerful, high-pitched ding, and the screen flashed bright green. Harper Vaughn, Seat 1A, First Class, Diamond Elite. Reed's smug expression faltered. He stared at the screen, blinking rapidly as if the pixels had somehow organized themselves into a lie. He typed furiously on his keyboard, pulling up the passenger manifest. "Is there an issue with the system, Reed?" Harper asked quietly. I need to verify this," Reed stammered, his face flushing a dull shade of red. He scrutinized the booking. It was fully paid, not an upgrade. "Anyone can screenshot a boarding pass. I need to see your ID." It was a blatant violation of protocol. The scanner had already verified the secure barcode and she had passed through TSA. But Harper, not wanting to delay her own departure, smoothly produced her black passport and handed it over. Reed inspected it as if searching for a forgery, running his thumb over the gold foil. Finding nothing amiss, he shoved it back across the counter. "Fine," Reed muttered, refusing to meet her eyes. He did not offer the standard, "Welcome aboard," or "Thank you for flying with us." He simply looked past her. "Go ahead." Harper took her passport, her eyes locking onto Reed's for a fraction of a second longer than comfortable. "Customer service training is held in Terminal 3 on Tuesdays," she said softly. "You might want to sign up." Leaving Reed fuming at the desk, Harper walked down the jet bridge. She thought the worst part of the flight was over. She had no idea that the disrespect at the gate was merely the prelude to a much darker symphony. The cabin of the Boeing 777 was a sanctuary of luxury, smelling faintly of leather and expensive citrus cabin spray. Harper turned left into the first-class cabin and easily located seat 1A, the prime window seat at the bulkhead. She slipped off her canvas duffel bag and opened the overhead bin. Before she could lift her bag, a sharp, manicured hand slammed the bin shut. Harper turned to see Vivian Lang, the lead flight attendant. Vivian had a tight, unnerving smile pinned to her face, a smile that did not reach her cold, calculating eyes. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe fringe twist, and she stood with her hands resting on her hips, physically blocking Harper from the storage compartment. "I'm sorry, sweetie," Vivian said, her tone dripping with saccharine venom. "These bins are reserved for our first-class patrons. You'll need to check that bag or take it with you to the main cabin. You're holding up the aisle." Harper let out a slow, measured breath. "I'm a first-class patron. I'm in seat 1A. Vivian's eyes darted to the seat, then back to Harper. The disbelief on her face was almost theatrical. "Seat 1A, really? Let me see your boarding pass." Harper presented her phone again. Vivian squinted at it, leaning in close as if trying to find a watermark that would prove it was a fake. When she could not, her polite veneer cracked just a fraction. "Well," Vivian said, her voice dropping an octave, "we have a strict dress code in the premium cabin as per airline policy. It's designed to maintain a certain atmosphere for our business travelers. Your attire is highly inappropriate." There was no such policy. Harper knew the airline's rulebook better than the CEO of Transglobal Airlines, mostly because her company had consulted on rewriting it years earlier. Unless the policy changed in the last few minutes, the only restriction is offensive language or bare feet. Harper replied, her voice remaining perfectly steady. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to stow my bag." Vivian reluctantly stepped aside, though she dramatically rolled her eyes as Harper settled into her wide leather seat. Preston Ashford, the man from the boarding gate, marched into the cabin. Vivian instantly transformed. Her rigid posture softened into a welcoming bow. "Mr. Ashford, welcome back. Can I take your coat? A glass of the Laurent Perrier before takeoff?" Vivian cooed, taking his jacket and hanging it in the front closet. "Yes, champagne would be lovely, Vivian," Preston said, settling into seat 1B directly across the aisle from Harper. As he sat down, he glanced over at Harper, his lip curling in visible disgust. He leaned toward the aisle, catching Vivian's attention before she walked away to fetch his drink. "Vivian," Preston whispered loudly enough for the entire quiet cabin to hear, "are we running a charity flight today? I paid $10,000 for a transatlantic ticket for peace, quiet, and exclusivity. Not to sit next to someone who looks like they just rolled out of a homeless shelter." Vivian giggled, an actual, audible giggle. "I completely understand, Mr. Ashford. Unfortunately, there's been a ticketing error at the gate. I'll see what I can do to make your flight more comfortable." Harper opened her laptop and began typing, ignoring the whispering. She had dealt with men like Preston and women like Vivian her entire life. She knew that reacting angrily would only feed their narrative. She preferred to let them dig their own graves. Sometime later, the cabin door was preparing to close. Vivian walked down the aisle with a tray of pre-departure beverages. She stopped at Preston's seat, handing him a crystal flute of champagne with a beaming smile. She then handed a glass to the passenger in 2A and the passenger in 2B. She walked right past Harper. "Excuse me," Harper called out smoothly. "I'll take a sparkling water, please." Vivian paused, turning slowly. "Oh, we're actually out of clean glassware for the pre-departure service. I can get you a plastic cup of water once we reach cruising altitude." It was a blatant, deliberate slight. But before Harper could press the issue, Vivian returned to the galley, whispering furiously to another flight attendant. A moment later, Vivian marched back down the aisle, her face set in a mask of rigid authority. She stopped directly in front of Harper's seat. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to collect your belongings," Vivian said, her voice unnaturally loud, ensuring the entire first-class cabin was watching. Harper looked up from her screen. "Excuse me? We have a situation," Vivian lied, her eyes gleaming with malice. "We have a married couple, diamond status, who were accidentally separated in the booking system. They need to sit together. We're moving you back to seat 34E in the main cabin to accommodate them. We'll refund the difference in fare, of course." Harper glanced around. There was no distressed couple waiting in the aisle. There was only Preston Ashford smirking behind his champagne flute. "I'm not moving," Harper said evenly. "I booked this specific seat months ago. If a couple needs to sit together, you can ask someone else to volunteer, or they can sit apart." Vivian's face hardened. The fake customer service smile vanished completely. "It wasn't a request, ma'am. It's a crew directive. If you fail to follow a direct order from a flight attendant, you are in violation of federal aviation regulations. Now pick up your bag and move to the back, or we will have a serious problem." The silence in the first-class cabin was deafening. The other wealthy passengers had stopped reading their newspapers and sipping their drinks, their eyes locked on the unfolding drama. Preston Ashford sat back, a satisfied gleam in his eye, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Harper calmly closed her laptop. She did not raise her voice, but the sudden sharpness in her tone cut through the cabin air like a diamond blade. "I suggest you choose your next words very carefully, Vivian, because you are currently lying to a passenger, attempting to fraudulently downgrade a confirmed ticket, and threatening me with federal regulations to cover up your personal bias. I am not moving to 34E. Vivian's face flushed a deep, furious crimson. She was used to passengers cowering when threatened with the rulebook. She was not used to being challenged, especially not by someone she deemed so thoroughly beneath her. "Right. That's it," Vivian hissed. She spun on her heel and stormed toward the front galley, picking up the heavy red intercom phone that connected directly to the cockpit. A few moments later, the heavy reinforced door to the flight deck clicked open. Out stepped Captain Harlan Voss. He was a broad-shouldered veteran of the skies, a man who commanded authority and expected immediate compliance. He adjusted his captain's hat and walked down the aisle, his face a mask of stern disapproval, with Vivian trailing right behind him like a victorious shadow. "What seems to be the problem here?" Captain Voss demanded, looking down at Harper. He did not ask what happened. His tone immediately implied that Harper was the instigator. "Captain, this passenger is being belligerent and refusing to follow crew instructions," Vivian chimed in quickly, playing the victim. "I politely asked her to relocate to accommodate a priority family issue, and she became verbally abusive and hostile. She is disrupting the cabin, and I feel unsafe performing my duties with her up here." Preston Ashford nodded vigorously. "It's true, Captain. The woman is unhinged. She's been a menace since the boarding gate. We shouldn't have to tolerate this kind of aggression." Harper stared at the three of them, the unholy trinity of privilege, bias, and unchecked authority. She felt a cold, familiar anger rising in her chest, but she kept her face completely impassive. "Captain," Harper said evenly, "your flight attendant is lying. Ask her to produce this separated couple. They don't exist. She is attempting to downgrade me simply because Mr. Ashford here doesn't like my sweater. And if you check your manifest, you'll see I am a Diamond Elite flyer." Captain Voss did not even look at his tablet. He looked at Harper, his expression hardening. He trusted his crew unconditionally, and looking at the casually dressed black woman in seat 1A, he had clearly already made up his mind. "Ma'am, I don't care about your frequent flyer status," Voss growled, leaning in close to try and intimidate her. "My flight attendants are in charge of this cabin. If Vivian says you're being disruptive, then you're being disruptive. I will not tolerate hostility on my aircraft. You have two choices. You can gather your things and walk back to seat 34E right now, or I will call airport security, have you forcibly removed from this aircraft, and put you on the federal no-fly list. The threat hung in the air. A forced removal would mean police officers dragging her down the aisle. It would mean humiliation, a missed meeting in London, and a massive PR headache. It was the ultimate trump card that airlines use to silence passengers. Harper looked at Captain Voss. You're making a catastrophic mistake, Captain. I highly recommend you step back into your cockpit, call your dispatch operations center, and read them the name on seat 1A. Voss let out a harsh bark of laughter. I don't need to call dispatch to deal with an unruly passenger. I'm the supreme authority on this aircraft. Are you moving, or am I calling the police? Call them, Harper said softly. Voss's eyes widened in shock. He had not expected her to call his bluff. Furious, he pulled his radio off his belt. Gate agent, this is Captain Voss. We have a level 2 disruption in first class. Passenger refusing to comply. Send Chicago PD and airport security onto the aircraft immediately. We need a physical extraction. Copy that, Captain. Reed Slater's eager voice crackled over the radio. Security is on the way. Vivian smirked, crossing her arms. Preston Ashford raised his champagne glass to the captain in a silent toast of victory. Harper did not panic. She did not scream. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her smartphone. She ignored the warning glare from Vivian and bypassed the standard cellular network, opening an encrypted communication. She dialed a single private number. It rang twice. Callum, Harper said calmly into the phone, the cabin silent as everyone watched her. Hundreds of miles away, sitting in a glass-walled office overlooking a massive command center, Callum Drake, the chief operations officer of Vaughn Aviation Logistics, sat up straight. Ms. Vaughn, is everything all right? You're scheduled for Wheels Up soon. There's been a change of plans, Callum, Harper said. Her eyes locked dead onto Captain Voss's. I'm currently sitting on Transglobal Flight 82 at O'Hare. The flight crew is attempting to have me illegally arrested and removed from the aircraft due to racial profiling. Captain Voss scoffed loudly. Put the phone away, ma'am. It's too late to call your lawyer. Harper ignored him. Callum, pull the ground service contracts for Transglobal Airlines at O'Hare. Pulling them now, Harper. Callum's voice came through crisp and clear. We handle all their baggage routing, fuel lines, tug operations, and gate leasing at ORD. Excellent, Harper said, a dangerous icy edge creeping into her voice. Suspend them. There was a brief pause on the line. Suspend the O'Hare contracts? Harper, that will freeze every transglobal flight at the airport. It will cascade through their entire global network. I know exactly what it will do, Callum, Harper replied. Suspend all ground operations for Transglobal at O'Hare immediately. Tell the tug drivers to kill their engines. Lock the jet bridges. Shut off the fuel lines. Nobody moves until I say so. Oh, and Callum. Yes, Harper? Patch me through to the Federal Aviation Administration's regional director. I need to report a rogue pilot who's abusing federal security protocols. Harper lowered the phone and looked up at Captain Voss, whose confident sneer was beginning to falter as the sheer weight of her words began to register. You wanted to show me who has authority, Captain, Harper whispered, her eyes burning with an intense, unstoppable fire. Let's see how much authority you have when your plane doesn't have the fuel to fly, the tug for pushback, or the gate to return to. Captain Harlan Voss stared at Harper Vaughn for several long, agonizing seconds before bursting into a loud, patronizing laugh. The sound bounced off the curved ceiling of the first-class cabin, harsh and entirely devoid of genuine amusement. Vaughn Aviation Logistics, Voss scoffed, shaking his head as he unclipped the heavy radio from his belt. That's a cute trick, lady. I don't know what kind of theatrical performance you think you're putting on, but playing pretend CEO on your cell phone isn't going to save you from a federal offense. You're delusional. Vivian Lang, standing just behind the captain's broad shoulder, let out a dramatic sigh of relief. She crossed her arms, her manicured nails digging into the pristine fabric of her uniform sleeves. She's been making up rules and throwing tantrums since she sat down, Captain. I've never seen anything like it. It's completely unhinged." Across the aisle, Preston Ashford swirled the remaining champagne in his crystal flute. A smug, satisfied grin plastered across his face. "Just get her off the plane, Voss. The rest of us paid a premium for exclusivity, not to be a captive audience to a psychotic breakdown." "Help is on the way, Mr. Ashford," Voss assured him, giving the wealthy passenger a crisp, respectful nod. Less than 2 minutes later, the heavy thud of tactical boots echoed down the jet bridge. 2 Chicago Police Department officers, flanked by an airport security supervisor, stepped through the forward cabin door. Officer Brennan, a burly man with a stern, no-nonsense expression, placed his hand over his radio and looked directly at the captain. "Captain Voss," Brennan said, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "We received a Code 3 from the gate agent. Hostile passenger refusing crew directives. Where is the disruption?" Voss raised a thick finger and pointed squarely at Harper, who was sitting perfectly still, her hands resting calmly on her lap. "Seat 1A. She refused to follow a direct relocation order from my lead flight attendant, became verbally abusive, and is now issuing threats against the airline. I want her removed from my aircraft immediately. If she resists, put her in cuffs." Officer Brennan turned his gaze to Harper. He assessed the situation, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in her relaxed posture, the faded gray hoodie, and the stark contrast between her calm demeanor and the frantic, red-faced anger of the flight crew. He had responded to hundreds of air rage incidents in his career, and the disruptive passengers were usually screaming, crying, or throwing things. The woman in 1A looked like she was waiting for a bus. "Ma'am," Officer Brennan said, stepping into the aisle and looming over her seat. "You need to gather your belongings and come with us. Now." Harper did not flinch. She slowly raised her eyes to meet the officer's gaze. "Officer Brennan, I highly advise you to wait a moment before you lay a hand on me. You are being manipulated by a flight crew attempting to cover up a blatant civil rights violation." "I'm not here to debate airline policy, ma'am," Brennan replied, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. The metallic clink sent a ripple of absolute silence through the cabin. "The captain has ultimate authority on this vessel. He wants you off. Stand up." "She's crazy, officer," Vivian chimed in, her voice shrill and triumphant. "She just pretended to call someone to shut down the airport. Just drag her out." Harper ignored the flight attendant entirely. Instead, she turned her head slowly to the left, looking out the thick oval window of the Boeing 737. The sprawling tarmac of O'Hare International Airport was a chaotic, beautiful ballet of heavy machinery. Fuel trucks with massive hoses, motorized baggage belts, and heavy pushback tugs were constantly in motion, a symphony of logistics that kept the modern world in the air. "Almost time," Harper whispered softly, her breath fogging the glass. "Ma'am, I am not asking you again," Officer Brennan began, reaching out to grasp Harper's arm. Suddenly, the massive 12-ton pushback tug that had just clamped onto the front landing gear of their aircraft let out a loud mechanical whine. The deep rumble of its diesel engine sputtered, choked, and abruptly died. The flashing yellow warning lights atop the vehicle went dark. Outside the window, a baggage handler halfway through loading a cart of heavy suitcases simply dropped the luggage he was holding onto the tarmac. He reached up, pulled the heavy noise-canceling earmuffs off his head, and walked away from the conveyor belt, leaving the cargo bay door wide open. Across the adjacent gates, visible through the terminal windows, a synchronized wave of paralysis swept through the airport. The fuel truck stopped pumping. The motorized jet bridges froze mid-extension. The blinking beacons of the ground marshal wands were lowered and switched off. In a matter of seconds, the bustling, frantic energy of Transglobal Airlines' primary Midwestern hub was completely, chillingly extinguished. Inside the cabin, the effect was immediate. The faint, rhythmic hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit, which provided air conditioning and lighting while on the ground, suddenly cut out. The brighter cabin lights died, plunging first class into dim, shadowy emergency lighting. The hum of the air vents ceased. The silence was absolute, heavy and terrifying. Captain Voss stumbled forward, grabbing the bulkhead to steady himself as the sudden loss of power threw his equilibrium off. "What the hell was that?" he barked, his bravado instantly evaporating. "Did we just lose the APU?" Before anyone could answer, the heavy red emergency phone on the galley wall began to scream. It was not the standard digital chime of a flight attendant calling. It was the shrill mechanical klaxon of an override call directly from the airport traffic control tower. Voss lunged for the phone, ripping it off the receiver. "Flight deck, Voss speaking. We just lost ground power and the tug disconnected. What is going on out there?" The voice on the other end of the line belonged to the chief ground controller, and he sounded like a man who was watching the world burn. "Captain Voss, you are ordered to hold your position. Do not attempt to start your engines. I repeat, do not engage your engines." "I don't have a tug, I don't have power, and my baggage bay is open," Voss yelled, sweat beading on his forehead. "What is the nature of the emergency? Is there a security breach?" "It's not a security breach, Captain," the controller stammered, his voice laced with raw panic. "It's a localized operational lockout. Vaughn Aviation Logistics just executed an emergency suspension of all trans-global ground contracts at O'Hare. Every single one. The tug drivers killed their engines. The fuelers shut the valves. The gate agents are locked out of the boarding software. Nothing belonging to Transglobal is moving at this airport. They've paralyzed us." The blood drained from Captain Voss's face so fast he looked instantly ill. His knees went weak and he slumped against the galley counter. The red phone slipped an inch from his ear. "What? What?" Voss whispered, his voice cracking. "Why? They can't just do that. It's a breach of contract. It's illegal. They invoked the hostile environment clause in Section 4 of the Master Agreement," the controller fired back. "The note we just received from their legal department states that a trans-global flight crew is currently attempting an illegal forced detainment of their chief executive officer. Voss, what the hell is happening on your plane?" The phone slipped entirely from the captain's grip, clattering loudly against the floor. He slowly turned his head, his wide, terrified eyes locking onto the black woman in the faded gray hoodie sitting in seat 1A. Harper Vaughn sat perfectly still in the dim emergency lighting. She did not look triumphant. She did not look angry. She looked like a judge who had just delivered a death sentence. "I told you, Captain," Harper said, her voice cutting through the silent cabin like a gunshot. "You should have checked the name on the manifest." Officer Brennan, sensing the catastrophic shift in the atmosphere, slowly lowered his handcuffs. He looked from the pale, trembling captain to the calm, commanding woman in the seat. Cops had a sixth sense for authority, and Brennan suddenly realized that the true power in the room was not the man with the gold stripes on his shoulders. "Captain," Brennan asked carefully, stepping backward out of the aisle, "do you still want this passenger removed?" Voss could not speak. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He stared at Harper, the reality of his colossal career-ending mistake crashing down upon him with the weight of a commercial airliner. He had not just insulted a VIP. He had attempted to arrest the woman who literally owned the ground they were parked on. Vivienne Long, entirely oblivious to the technical disaster unfolding outside the plane, stepped forward with an exasperated huff. "Why are we waiting, officer? Arrest her. She's clearly a hacker or something. She turned off the lights. This is a federal offense." "Shut up, Vivienne!" Voss roared, his voice cracking with sheer hysteria. The sudden explosion of rage caused the flight attendant to jump back, her eyes wide with shock. "Just shut your mouth." Voss took a trembling step toward Harper. His arrogant, barrel-chested posture had collapsed. He looked small, defeated, and desperate. "Ms. Vaughn, I didn't know. The system just said Diamond Elite. It didn't flag you as someone who mattered, as someone whose net worth exceeded your ability to intimidate them." Harper finished his sentence, her voice devoid of any warmth. "That's the problem, Captain Voss. You shouldn't need a flashing warning light on your computer screen to treat a human being with basic dignity. You looked at my clothes, you looked at my skin, and you decided I was disposable." "Please," Voss begged, his voice dropping to a pathetic whisper. Ms. Vaughn, if you don't release the ground lock, the airline will lose millions. My career? Your career ended the moment you told Reed Slater to call the police to enforce a racist downgrade, Harper replied coldly. I gave you a chance to investigate your flight attendant's lie. You chose to threaten me with the federal no-fly list. Across the aisle, Preston Ashford had stopped smirking. The wealthy businessman was frantically typing on his phone, trying to access a news terminal to verify the chaos happening outside. When his screen finally loaded, illuminating his face in the dim cabin, his jaw dropped. Vaughn, Preston muttered, looking up at Harper with a sudden, horrifying realization. Vaughn Logistics. You're Harper Vaughn. Harper turned her gaze to Preston. I am. Preston swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. Ms. Vaughn, I must apologize for my earlier comment. I was stressed. The boarding process was chaotic. I am Preston Ashford, managing partner at Apex Global Capital. We actually submitted a $300 million proposal to your board recently. We want Vaughn Logistics to handle our new fleet of international cargo freighters. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Ashford, Harper said, leaning forward slightly. I read your prospectus on my previous flight. It was a compelling proposal, very aggressive, very lucrative. Preston let out a nervous, high-pitched chuckle. Yes, well, we believe in maximizing efficiency. I'm sure we can put this little misunderstanding behind us over a proper dinner in London. There will be no dinner, Mr. Ashford, Harper said softly, striking the final blow. And there will be no contract. When I evaluate a partnership, I look at the character of the executive leadership. You sit in first-class drinking champagne, demanding that the people you deem beneath you be removed from your sight so you don't have to look at them. You are a liability, Mr. Ashford. Consider your proposal permanently rejected. Preston Ashford sank back into his luxurious leather seat, as if he had been physically struck. In the span of a few minutes, his arrogant demand for a quiet flight had cost his firm a $300 million deal. He stared blankly at his champagne flute, the bubbles suddenly looking incredibly hollow. Before anyone else could speak, a sharp, piercing ringtone broke the silence. It was coming from Captain Voss's personal cell phone in his breast pocket. He pulled it out with trembling hands. The caller ID flashed brightly in the dim cabin. Walter Hale, CEO, Trans Global Airlines. Voss looked at the phone as if it were a live grenade. He slowly answered it, pressing it to his ear. Mr. Hale, sir, I can explain. The voice of the CEO was so loud, so completely enraged, that even the police officer standing in the galley could hear it clearly. Explain? There's nothing to explain, you absolute imbecile. My entire Midwestern network is grounded. We have 40 planes circling O'Hare with nowhere to land because you tried to arrest the woman who holds the lease to our gates. Are you out of your mind? Sir, Vivian told me she was hostile, Voss pleaded, throwing his flight attendant under the bus without hesitation. I don't care if she was tap dancing on the beverage cart, Hale screamed through the speaker. You put Harper Vaughn on the phone right this second, or I swear to God I will sue you for every penny you earn for the rest of your miserable life. Voss, his hands shaking violently, held the phone out to Harper. She did not take it. She simply leaned back in her seat and tapped the speakerphone icon on the screen. Good evening, Walter, Harper said calmly. The CEO's tone instantly shifted from homicidal rage to desperate, groveling panic. Harper, my God, Harper, I am so incredibly sorry. I am mortified. This is not how Transglobal operates. Please, I am begging you, lift the ground lockout. We are bleeding millions of dollars by the minute. FAA regulators are already calling my private line. We can fix this. We can, Walter, Harper agreed smoothly. But it's going to cost you a bit more than a complimentary drink voucher. Anything, Hale practically sobbed. Name it. Harper sat forward, her eyes sweeping over the pale, terrified faces of the flight crew. First, Captain Harlan Voss and lead flight attendant Vivian Lang are terminated, effective immediately. They are to leave this aircraft right now in the presence of the police they so eagerly called. Vivian gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Tears immediately welled up in her eyes. Voss closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping in total defeat. "Done," Hale said without a second of hesitation. "Consider them fired." "Second," Harper continued, "the gate agent, Reed Slater. He breached security protocols by demanding my physical ID after the digital scanner cleared me solely to harass me. He is to be fired before I step off this plane." "I'll have security escort him out of the terminal right now," Hale confirmed rapidly. "Third," Harper said, her voice dropping into a tone of absolute, unbreakable steel, "Transglobal Airlines will hire an independent, third-party civil rights auditing firm, approved by me, to overhaul your entire crew training program regarding racial bias and passenger profiling, and you will fund a $10 million scholarship program for minority pilots in the Chicago area." There was a brief pause on the line. $10 million was a massive hit, but compared to the grounding of an entire international fleet, it was a bargain. "We will draft the press release and the wire transfer immediately, Harper," Hale said, his voice solemn. "You have my absolute word." "See that you do, Walter," Harper said. "I'll be watching." She tapped the screen, ending the call. The silence in the first-class cabin returned, but the energy had completely shifted. It was no longer the silence of intimidation. It was the silence of absolute sweeping victory. Harper picked up her own phone and dialed Callum at the command center. "Callum, the issue has been resolved. Release the ground locks. Turn the power back on. Let them fly." "Copy that, Harper," Callum replied. "Restarting operations now." Within moments, the low, powerful hum of the auxiliary power unit roared back to life. The bright cabin lights flickered on, banishing the shadows. Outside, the yellow warning lights of the tug vehicle began to flash, and the heavy diesel engine grumbled awake. The airport was breathing again. Officer Brennan, having witnessed the most ruthless corporate execution of his entire career, hoisted his radio. He looked at Captain Voss and Vivian Lang, who were both standing frozen in the aisle, stripped of their authority, their jobs, and their dignity. "Well," Officer Brennan said, gesturing toward the open cabin door with a slight smirk, "you heard the lady. You two are trespassing on a commercial aircraft. Time to go." As the disgraced captain and the weeping flight attendant were escorted off the plane, forced to do the walk of shame past the very passengers they had tried to impress, Harper Vaughn quietly opened her laptop. She did not gloat. She did not look at Preston Ashford, who was staring out the window in silent devastation. She simply pulled up her spreadsheets, adjusted her faded gray hoodie, and got back to work. The heavy silence inside the first-class cabin was thick enough to choke on. Some time had passed since Captain Harlan Voss and Vivian Lang had been unceremoniously marched off their own aircraft by the Chicago Police Department. The remaining passengers sat perfectly still, processing the sheer magnitude of the corporate execution they had just witnessed. In Seat 1B, Preston Ashford was visibly unraveling. The perfectly tailored charcoal suit that had looked so commanding during boarding now seemed to swallow his shrinking frame. He was sweating cold, terrified beads of perspiration gathering on his forehead. He stared at his phone, watching the internal emails from Apex Global Capital rolling in. His partners were asking for updates on the Vaughn Logistics acquisition. They were expecting to celebrate a $300 million victory. Instead, Preston had single-handedly detonated the deal because he could not stand the sight of a woman in a faded hoodie. Desperation makes arrogant men careless. Preston leaned across the aisle, his voice a frantic, breathless whisper. "Ms. Vaughn," Preston pleaded, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. "Harper, please. You have to understand the pressure I was under, the market volatility surrounding this merger. I spoke out of turn. I was entirely out of line. But you cannot penalize my entire firm for a momentary lapse in judgment. Hundreds of jobs rely on this contract." Harper Vaughn did not stop typing. She did not even turn her head. She simply kept her eyes fixed on the glowing screen of her laptop, reviewing a series of offshore supply chain metrics. "I am not penalizing your firm, Mr. Ashford," Harper replied, her tone as smooth and cold as polished marble. "I am protecting mine. A man who folds to his own prejudice under the minor inconvenience of commercial boarding is not a man who can handle a global supply chain crisis." If I trust you with my logistics network, your arrogance becomes my liability. The decision is final. I'll step down as the lead liaison, Preston begged, the last remnants of his dignity dissolving. I'll hand the account to someone else. Just don't pull the deal. Harper finally stopped typing. She slowly closed her laptop, the soft click sounding like a gavel dropping in a courtroom. She turned her head and met Preston's panicked gaze. "Do not speak to me again for the duration of this flight," Harper said softly, "or I will call my COO back and buy out your firm's primary debt holders by morning. Do you understand me?" Preston's mouth snapped shut. He sank back into his seat, his face drained of all color. He understood perfectly. He had spent his entire life wielding wealth as a weapon, and he had just brought a knife to a nuclear war. Sometime later, the reinforced door of the jet bridge swung open, and a new flight crew practically sprinted onto the aircraft. Transglobal Airlines had scrambled their emergency reserve crew, pulling them from the crew lounge with frantic, terrified orders straight from the CEO's office. Captain Tristan Roche, a seasoned pilot with graying temples, stepped into the cabin. He looked slightly out of breath, but his uniform was immaculate. Following closely behind him was Paige Lewis, a veteran lead flight attendant, who looked as though she had been thoroughly briefed on the catastrophic failure of her predecessor. Captain Roche did not address the cabin immediately. He walked straight down the aisle and stopped beside seat 1A. He removed his captain's hat, holding it respectfully at his side. "Ms. Vaughn," Captain Roche said, his voice calm, professional, and entirely devoid of the arrogance Voss had displayed. "I am Captain Roche. On behalf of Transglobal Airlines, I want to formally apologize for the inexcusable delay and the unacceptable treatment you received. My crew and I are here to ensure the rest of your journey is safe, comfortable, and entirely to your standard. We are fueled, cleared by ground control, and ready for pushback whenever you are." Harper offered him a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, Captain Roche. I appreciate you stepping in on such short notice. Let's get to London." "Right away, ma'am." Roche nodded, stepping into the flight deck and securing the heavy door. A moment later, Paige Lewis appeared at Harper's side, holding a silver tray. Resting on a crisp white linen napkin was a heavy crystal tumbler filled with sparkling water and a twist of lime, the exact drink Vivian had maliciously denied her. "For you, Ms. Vaughn," Paige said warmly. "If there is absolutely anything else you need, you just press your call button and I will be right here." "Thank you, Paige," Harper said, taking the glass as the Boeing 777 finally pushed back from the gate and began its taxi to the runway. The atmosphere in first class was fundamentally transformed. There was no more whispering. There were no more snide remarks. The flight to London was the quietest, most intensely respectful journey Transglobal Airlines had ever operated. The crew moved with the precision of a military honor guard, and the passengers, especially Preston Ashford, remained in terrified, silent awe. True power does not just win the battle, it changes the landscape entirely. By the time the flight touched down on the damp tarmac of London Heathrow, the world had already caught fire. While the first-class cabin had been relatively private, the initial altercation at the gate had not been. Several passengers in the Zone 4 boarding line had witnessed Reed Slater's blatant disrespect and recorded the entire interaction on their phones. Furthermore, a passenger sitting in seat 2B, a tech entrepreneur named Tristan Hale, had quietly recorded the audio of Captain Voss's arrogant threats and the subsequent arrival of the Chicago Police Department. Before Harper even retrieved her canvas duffel bag from the overhead bin, the hashtag #TransGlobalGrounded was trending #1 worldwide on social media. The internet is a ruthless, unforgiving judge. Leaked audio of a white captain and flight attendant attempting to weaponize federal security protocols to arrest a quietly sitting black woman ignited a firestorm of global outrage. When the public connected the dots and realized the woman in the faded hoodie had shut down the entire airport in response, Harper Vaughn was instantly elevated to legendary status. For the fired flight crew, the karma hit back with devastating, inescapable force. Vivian Lang, operating under the delusion that she was still the victim, attempted a massive PR spin. Days after the incident, she appeared on a national morning talk show hosted by Elise Langford, a journalist known for her razor-sharp interviews. Vivian wore a conservative dress, squeezed out a few strategic tears, and claimed she was simply following safety protocols to accommodate a distressed, separated family. "I was just doing my job," Vivian wept to the cameras, "and this billionaire hijacked the airplane and ruined my career over a misunderstanding." While the broadcast was still live on air, the legal team at Vaughn Aviation Logistics released a public statement. It was not an emotional defense. It was a devastating data dump. They released the encrypted, time-stamped passenger manifest from the gate, proving unequivocally that there was no separated couple in first class or anywhere else on the aircraft. Furthermore, they released the gate security footage showing Vivian actively blocking Harper from the overhead bin before any interaction had even taken place. Elise Langford received the breaking news in her earpiece mid-interview. The journalist's sympathetic expression vanished. She read the airline manifest live on the air, confronting Vivian with the undeniable proof of her lie. Vivian stammered, turned pale, and ripped her microphone off, storming off the set in a panic. The humiliating clip was viewed tens of millions of times by the end of the day. Vivian was permanently blacklisted by the flight attendants union and found herself completely unemployable in the aviation or hospitality sectors. Captain Harlan Voss faced a much harsher reality. The Federal Aviation Administration opened a formal investigation into his conduct. Activating a Level 2 physical extraction for a non-violent, fully compliant passenger was deemed a gross abuse of federal authority. His commercial pilot's license was suspended pending a massive psychological and procedural review. Stripped of his wings, his hefty salary, and his prestigious position, Voss was forced into early, disgraced retirement. He ended up flying small, unpressurized freight runs for a tiny failing logistics company in rural Alaska, a bitter daily reminder of the career he threw away. Reed Slater, the gate agent who started the entire chain reaction, was fired before he even finished his shift. The video of his smirking condescension made him the face of terrible customer service. He was last seen working the graveyard shift at a suburban toll booth, far away from the priority lanes of international travel. But the most spectacular downfall belonged to Preston Ashford. The morning after the flight landed, the board of directors at Apex Global Capital held an emergency session in Manhattan. The news of the failed $300 million deal had leaked, and the firm's stock had taken a massive hit. Preston stood at the head of the boardroom table, trying to spin the failure as a minor contractual disagreement. Sterling Pierce, the senior founding partner of the firm, silenced him by turning on the massive projector screen at the end of the room. He played the audio clip of Preston's voice, captured clearly by Tristan Hale's phone on the airplane. "Are we running a charity flight today? I paid $10,000 for exclusivity, not to sit next to someone who looks like they just rolled out of a homeless shelter." The audio echoed off the mahogany walls of the boardroom. The other partners stared at Preston with absolute disgust. "You lost us the Vaughn contract," Sterling Pierce said, his voice trembling with rage. "You alienated the most powerful logistics CEO on the planet, cost this firm millions in projected revenue, and dragged our name into a global PR nightmare, all because you wanted to play the elitist gatekeeper on an airplane. We're an international firm, Preston. We cannot survive with a managing partner who operates with such staggering, outdated prejudice." The vote was unanimous. Preston Ashford was stripped of his title. His equity was bought out at a fraction of its value, and he was escorted out of the Apex Global Capital building by the very security guards he used to ignore. He became a pariah in the financial district, his calls unreturned, his reputation entirely radioactive. Meanwhile, Transglobal Airlines kept their promise to Harper Vaughn. Terrified of losing their ground operations contracts, CEO Walter Hale initiated the most aggressive corporate restructuring in aviation history. The $10 million minority pilot scholarship was funded quickly, paving the way for hundreds of young, diverse aviators to earn their wings. The third-party civil rights audit purged the airline's training manuals of outdated biases, setting a new gold standard for the entire transportation industry. Harper Vaughn never did a single press interview about the incident. She did not need to. She returned to her London townhouse, poured herself a glass of vintage Pinot Noir, and continued running her multi-billion-dollar empire. She had proven that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful, and that true authority speaks through action, not volume. And that is how a faded hoodie, a pair of worn-in sneakers, and a massive dose of prejudice brought an entire international airline to its knees. Harper Vaughn did not just demand a superficial apology. She systematically dismantled the careers of those who thought power was a weapon meant to bully the vulnerable. Vivian, Reed, Captain Voss, and Preston Ashford learned the absolute hardest way that true authority does not need to shout, and karma rarely misses its target. It is a powerful, real-life reminder that you should never judge a book by its cover, because you never know who actually owns the entire library. If you love this story of absolute savage karma and want to hear more jaw-dropping dramas, hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good plot twist, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. Let us know in the comments what you would have done in Harper's shoes.